The Far Cry series is easily one of my favorite series of all time. There's a lot of mainline entries, spin-offs and even DLCs. This franchise is definitely not the most well liked, just like every Ubisoft franchise out there. But regardless of where it stands in the public eye, it's a franchise that I enjoy quite a lot, and that's really all that matters. I've already made Iceberg videos for Assassin's Creed and Watch Dogs, so to complete the 3 franchises that are Ubisoft's top 3, it's now time to do the Far Cry Iceberg Explained. You know, regardless if this video does well or not, I did have a lot of fun making this video because when it comes to Iceberg, secret details or videos similar to this, I just love making them. Now first of all, for those that don't know, what is an Iceberg video? Well, to put it in simple terms, an Iceberg video is a video that breaks down information about a topic, which in this case is the Far Cry series, in a layered and structured way. The idea is that the topics most people know are at the top, while the more hidden or obscure information is deeper down. The deeper you go, the more unusual and less known the information gets. So now that you know what an Iceberg video is, this is my Far Cry Iceberg that I've made. I've researched a lot of secrets, details, Easter eggs, developer stuff and whatnot from all over the internet and combined them all into the iceberg that I'll be talking about today. Just real quick before I get into it, do consider hitting that subscribe button if you do enjoy this video. Be sure to check out my other Iceberg videos I've made, and with all of that said, let's get right into the Far Cry Iceberg Explained. So let's start off with Tier 1. Now Tier 1 will contain a lot of information that most people would already know. So starting off, this should be common knowledge by now to everybody that's played either Far Cry 4, 5 or 6, and that is a secret ending within these games. In each one of these Far Cry games, there are secret endings that you can unlock quite soon. Let's start with Far Cry 4. In Far Cry 4, we'll meet Pagan Min early in the game, and we get left alone in a room to have a meal. Now naturally the story progresses when RJ leaves, but if you decide to wait for about 10 or 15 minutes, Pagan Min comes back. He then reveals details about his past with RJ's mother, shares the truth about RJ's father, and even shows RJ his half-sister's memorial, suggesting that RJ should place his mother's ashes there too. He then allows you to spread the ashes, and the game is then over. In Far Cry 5 at the beginning, we get tasked with arresting Joseph Seed, and this requires you to press a button to proceed. However, if you choose to wait for a minute or two, instead Joseph Seed will deliver some dialogue, after which the sheriff hints that trying to arrest Joseph Seed will likely end in their deaths. The sheriff then decides it's not worth the risk, and they simply leave. And that leaves us with Far Cry 6. Now the secret ending in this game requires you to wait for a bit longer compared to Far Cry 4 and Far Cry 5. So you first complete the entire prologue where you attempt to escape to Miami, end up helping Libertad and destroy Castillo's warships. After this you have a choice, take a boat and sail away or join Libertad. If you choose to take the boat and head towards the map's edge, you can unlock the secret ending. In this ending you safely reach Miami and are shown relaxing on a beach, while the radio broadcasts news of Libertad's failed efforts to overthrow Anton Castillo. It's a bit of a selfish ending, but still an amusing secret ending nonetheless. In Far Cry New Dawn, the game after Far Cry 5, one of the most surprising twists is the revelation that the mysterious character known as the Judge is actually Deputy Rook, the protagonist from Far Cry 5. You see, throughout Far Cry 5, we step into the shoes of Deputy Rook, a silent protagonist tasked with taking down the cult led by Joseph Seed. Despite all of our efforts, the game ends on a dark note, with Rook unable to stop the catastrophic event that Joseph Seed predicted. This ending leaves the protagonist in a fragile state, both mentally and physically, setting up the dark transformation that we see in New Dawn. This game introduces the Judge, and when New Dawn was first released, this was a theory, as it was not confirmed if the Judge was actually the deputy. However, as years went by, after the release of the Far Cry 6 DLC, it's now revealed that the Judge is in fact Deputy Rook. After the world fell apart at the end of Far Cry 5, Rook was captured by what was left of Eden's Gate, and subjected to brutal psychological and physical torture. This trauma broke their spirit and erased their identity, leading them to become the Judge, a mute masked enforcer of Joseph Seed's new order. What does the name of the game Far Cry even mean? Have we ever stopped to just think about that? Well, I have. The truth is there is no real explanation as to the name Far Cry, but there are a few pretty good suggestions that say otherwise. The one I can see fitting well is the name Far Cry being a reference to the phrase "you're a far cry from home." This makes sense considering the first few games consistently place the protagonist in unfamiliar, exotic and hostile environments far from home. Other people have theorized that the original studio Crytek simply liked putting the word or phrase cry into their game titles, similar to Crisis. Well, the one that makes the most sense for me is in the original 3 Far Cry games, Far Cry 1, Far Cry Instincts and Far Cry Instincts Evolution, the storyline revolved around a mutagen known as Project Far Cry. After Ubisoft acquired the series from the original developers, they decided to keep the name, but took the series in a different approach, which is why Far Cry 2 and the games after Far Cry 2 are quite distinct from the originals. Whatever the case may be, nobody really knows the true meaning of the game title Far Cry. We all know and love Vaas, right? A villain that overshadowed the actual villain in his own game. Well, in Far Cry 3, it's believed that we had seen the end of Vaas when Jason Brody seemingly killed him in a drastic stabbing scene. However, Far Cry 6's Insanity DLC reveals a surprising twist. Vaas did not actually die at that moment. Instead, after being stabbed, Vaas finds himself trapped in his own mind, where he confronts haunting memories and unresolved issues, particularly those involving his sister Citra. The Dragon Blade, which was the weapon that was supposed to end Vaas's life, turns out to have mystical qualities that play an important role in his survival. Throughout the DLC, we explore Vaas's mental battles, and it's pretty clear that instead of succumbing to his wounds, he's fighting to reclaim control over his own life, breaking free from Citra's influence. By the end of the DLC, it's confirmed that Vaas did survive the events of Far Cry 3. The second ending shows him years later on a beach that resembles the Rook Islands, talking to a tennis ball he's decorated to look like Jason Brody. It's a very odd but fitting symbol of his complicated past. This final scene not only confirms Vaas's survival, but also hints at his possible future in the Far Cry series. Far Cry Instincts is a game developed and published by Ubisoft for the Xbox. It's basically a reimagining of the original Far Cry that came out on PC. It was released on September 27, 2005. While it does have similarities to the original game, Instincts offers a more linear experience, moving away from the open-ended gameplay that the PC version was known for. To make up for this, the game adds some new cool features, like feral powers that gives the player special abilities, extra multiplayer modes through Xbox Live, and a map creator mode where players can build their own multiplayer maps. You see, Far Cry Instincts received a lot of praise from gaming sites and publications, with many calling it one of the best shooters on the Xbox. However, some players were disappointed by the more linear gameplay and less advanced AI, feeling that Far Cry Instincts did not quite measure up to the original PC version. A follow-up to Far Cry Instincts titled Far Cry Instincts Evolution was released for the Xbox on March 28, 2006. While this game did not achieve the same level of popularity as Instincts, Evolution introduced a new single-player campaign, though it was notably shorter than the one in Instincts. The game also added new weapons and vehicles, a bonus multiplayer mode, and an expanded map maker. However, Evolution is not backwards compatible with the Xbox 360, and maps created in the Xbox version of Instincts cannot be transferred to the Xbox 360. On the same day that Evolution was released, Far Cry Instincts Predator was launched for the Xbox 360. This version featured graphically enhanced editions of both Instincts and Evolution. While it is more of a graphical port than a full remaster, Predator is likely the best way to experience both Instincts and Evolution, as it's available via backwards compatibility on Xbox One and Xbox Series X and S. Far Cry 3 has this one certain aspect in the game that's always a bit nerve-wracking, and that is its random jump scares. Now, these are not traditional jump scares involving horror, but rather unexpected creatures in the waters jumping at you. The main one is a crocodile. So when randomly exploring an underwater cave or walking nearby a river's shore, a crocodile can unexpectedly jump out at you and give you a definite jump scare. These jump scares don't just happen at one location, but at quite a few. You know, I remember when I was 12 years old playing this game. I can still remember the exact moment when a crocodile jumped out at me. It's pretty interesting because Far Cry 3 is filled with dangerous wildlife, but many of these threats are visible, allowing you to prepare to avoid them. Crocodiles, however, are often hiding and strike with little warning. Throughout the Far Cry games, from Far Cry 3 all the way up to Far Cry 6, there is always one certain mission that's a given. A mission that seems like it's always going to be part of the game, and that mission is a burning fields or a burning weeds kind of mission. At this point, it's pretty much a staple for Ubisoft to implement such a mission type into their games. In fact, you might as well place a bet on Far Cry 7 having this type of mission in the game. For example, in Far Cry 3, the mission titled Kick the Hornet's Nest involves you burning 5 row crop fields. That mission is further improved by that unique song by Damian Marley and Skrillex, which plays throughout the destruction. In Far Cry 4, the Burning Fields mission comes during the mission named Burn It Down. In this mission, we're sent by Sabal to burn down fields of opium, which is used to fund pagan Min's regime. In Far Cry 5, the mission named Sins of the Father involves burning Fatesea's Bliss Fields. And last but not least, one of my favourite missions is the Far Cry 6 version of this, during the mission named Fire and Fury. We must burn the Viviro Plantation Farm, and the song that plays is Bella Ciao. You know, I would play a little part of that mission right now, but of course I'll get hit with the biggest copyright strike you would ever see. It is pretty nuts that Ubisoft managed to get such great song choices for burning fields or burning weeds in their Far Cry games, so kudos to them for that. If you played any of the Far Cry games, then you'd know easily that Boomer the dog is a dog you simply cannot hate. We get him in Far Cry 5 through the Thanks for Hire system, and very quickly Boomer becomes a fan favorite. This made it especially heartbreaking when one of the game's official canonical endings involved a nuclear explosion that devastated Hope County, Montana, presumably claiming Boomer's life along with countless others. Now at that point, it was pretty safe to assume that Boomer was no more, as he simply could not survive such an explosion. However, Far Cry 6 might have rewritten this sad chapter by bringing back the lovable companion in a surprising way. You see, in this game, we're able to recruit various animal friends to the Amigos for Hire system, and during the mission Boom or Bust, we'll come across a familiar face. So as you search through shipping containers for weapons, most are filled with dangerous pumas. However, one container reveals a dog that looks exactly like Boomer from Far Cry 5. After finding the dog, Danny talks to Juan Cortez, who emphasizes the importance of giving animals names to give them an identity. Danny then names the dog Boom Boom, which feels like a playful nod from Ubisoft to Boomer's striking resemblance. But the real revelation comes from a note found inside the container. It reveals that Boom Boom was sent to Yara from Montana by a crazy American named Herc, who wanted to give the dog a better life. Herc is of course somebody we all know. I'll talk more about him later on. Anyway, this note strongly suggests that the dog you found in Far Cry 6 is indeed Boomer. It seems Herc managed to get Boomer out of Hope County, Montana before the nuclear explosion, saving him from the fate that many people, including myself, believed he had met. There's a few returning characters in the Far Cry franchise that you'll see throughout most of the games. One of them is Willis Huntley. Now Willis Huntley is a strange character. Is he a good guy, a bad guy, or both? Well, he betrays us in Far Cry 4 and also in Far Cry 5. He claims to work for the US government, but his story is definitely mysterious. In Far Cry 3, 4 and 5, he says he's with the CIA. Honestly, it's hard to believe Willis has any real connection to the US government beyond what he claims, because we don't actually see any proof of this. If he was truly an agent, wouldn't his activities in Kyrat sparked an international incident, especially since Pagan Min's intelligence was aware of him? And why doesn't he show up in Far Cry New Dawn? He could have been involved in one of the expeditions or even had a connection to Far Cry 6. What drives Willis to do what he does? Where does all of his money come from? The weapons are probably supplied by Longinus. But if he really is some kind of secret agent, why is he so focused on taking out minor characters instead of the big threats like Hoyt, Deplo or the Seed family? And did you notice his first appearance in Far Cry 3 happens during one of Jason's mushroom trips? All the missions he gives seem important, but he's trusting them to characters who don't seem like the best fit. Jason was a rich kid with no experience. RJ was an unemployed young adult with no real connections. And Hope County was on lockdown after Eden's Gate took over. So how did Willis even get out of there? And if he did, how? For all we know, Willis could be a billionaire psychopath using the world as his playground. Staying on the topic of Mr. Willis Huntley, we already know that he only appears in Far Cry 3, 4 and 5, but not shown at all in Far Cry 6. Well, the good thing is Ubisoft does not forget, and Willis Huntley is definitely referenced in Far Cry 6 not just once, but twice. So if you visit Juan's workshop on Libertad Island, also known as Juan's Weapons, and head up to the second floor, you'll find a desk with a map of Yara spread out on it. Right next to the desk, there's a bin with a crumpled letter from W. Huntley. But what really stands out is a small box on the desk containing a US dog tag with Willis Huntley's name on it. The fact that Juan Cortez had this might suggest that they've had a run-in with each other at some point. The second reference is a lot easier to overlook. So at the end of the mission named The Deported in Yara's LS Day region, we're given the choice to either kill Sean McKay or let him go. Although taking him out might seem like the obvious decision due to his actions, there's a hidden reference if you decide to spare him and stick around. If you wait for a few minutes, McKay will begin making phone calls. The first call he makes is to Willis Huntley himself to discuss business. If you continue to wait once more, you'll also hear him talk to Longinus, a character from Far Cry 4 who I'll go over more in depth later on in the Iceberg. In Far Cry 4, you're put into the middle of a civil war in Kyrat, where two factions of the Golden Path led by Amita and Sabal vie for control. Throughout the game, the protagonist RJ Gale must make choices that align with either Amita or Sabal's vision for Kyrat, shaping the outcome of the conflict. However, regardless of which side you choose during the main story, the game gives you the option to secretly let you kill both Amita and Sabal even after the game is finished, ensuring that neither of their potentially tyrannical regimes come to power. So you can find Sabal at Jelendu Temple, where he's taking refuge and plans to execute the people who supported Amita. After the dialogue, you can simply kill him and he'll be dead forever. When it comes to Amita, you can find her in the West Mountains attempting to regroup and continue her fight. In this video, she's mauled to death by two dogs, but you can also take her out with a gun just as normal. Now, although although these two deaths are not canonical at all and are just gameplay related, it's still interesting because you can technically leave Kira in a state of uncertainty, but free from their compelling ideologies. This choice reflects your ultimate rejection of both leaders' methods and visions for Kyrat, suggesting that neither approach is suitable for the region's future. However, in your head, this can also plunge Kira in a power vacuum, where new conflicts could arise in the absence of a strong leadership, but regardless, it's still fun to know that this is an option anyway. Did I ever tell you what the definition of insanity is? I'm sure you've heard that phrase a million times, and deservedly so. This phrase has become such an iconic line in gaming history thanks to its chilling delivery by the character Vaas Montenegro in Far Cry 3, who's played by Michael Mando. The line is delivered during one of the game's key moments, when Vaas has captured Jason Brody. Vaas, who is the primary antagonist for much of the game, even though Hoyt is the main villain, taunts Jason by describing the definition of insanity as repeating the same action over and over again, expecting a different result. He uses this concept to mock Jason's repeated attempts to escape and defeat him, despite always falling back into Vaas's grasp. And now we move on to tier 2. This tier is where your Far Cry knowledge gets a bit more challenging. I expect most people to be familiar with many of these topics, but there might be a few surprises that could catch you off guard. Let's start off this tier with a theory that was a talking point for quite a while, and that's the theory that Diego is a younger Vaas. Now straight off the bat, I don't agree with this theory one bit, because when you look closer, it just does not add up. The speculation started when a leaked cover of Far Cry 6 surfaced right before the official reveal. Some fans, including IGN's Joe Screbbles, noticed a similar scar on the right eyebrows about Diego and Vaas and speculate that Diego might eventually become Vaas. But this idea was quickly debunked when it was pointed out that Vaas doesn't actually have this scar in Far Cry 3. It only appeared in a related live-action web series, not in the actual game. Another key difference is their eye color. Vaas has blue eyes in Far Cry 3, while Diego's eyes are dark brown in Far Cry 6. This is a pretty big distinction and makes it unlikely that they're the same person. Where they come from is another factor. Vaas is tied to the Rook Islands, while Diego is from Yara, the setting of Far Cry 6. Even though Vaas's exact birthplace is not spelled out in Far Cry 3, it's highly unlikely that he was born in Yara, given how different the two locations are. The timeline also does not fit. Far Cry 6 takes place around 2020 or 2021, while the events of Far Cry 3 likely happened in 2012. This would mean Vaas would be much older than Diego in Far Cry 6, which doesn't line up unless Ubisoft decided to completely rewrite the series' timeline. Lastly, Michael Mando, who plays Vaas, has hinted at the possibility of returning to the role, which got fans excited, but there's no solid evidence connecting Vaas and Diego, beyond fan theories and wishful thinking. So while the idea that Diego could be a younger Vaas is interesting, the facts just don't support it. Unless Ubisoft decides to completely change the story, it's safe to say that Diego and Vaas are two separate characters with their own unique stories. Far Cry Vengeance, released for the Wii in December 2006, is a unique but troubled entry in the Far Cry series. It's technically part of the Far Cry Instinct spin-off series and is often considered the third installment, though some people might argue that Far Cry Instinct's Predator deserves our spot. However, Far Cry Vengeance is not a sequel. It's a remake of Far Cry Instinct's Evolution, specifically adapted for the Nintendo Wii. What makes Far Cry Vengeance different is its attempt to take advantage of the Wii's motion controls, offering players a new way to interact with the game. The controls allowed for gestures like swinging the Wii remote to use a machete or aiming with more precision than previous Far Cry games. While the idea had potential, the execution was lacking. The motion controls were inconsistent, sometimes working well but often feeling clunky and unresponsive, frustrating many players. Visually, Far Cry Vengeance was a significant downgrade compared to its predecessors. The graphics were widely criticized for being blurry, low resolution, and lacking the polish expected from a Far Cry game. The game suffered from technical issues such as poor textures, noticeable pop-in, and a sluggish frame rate, all of which hurt the overall experience. Despite these issues, Far Cry Vengeance did try to expand on Evolution's story with 3 additional levels and some new content, featuring exclusive maps and weapons. However, these additions were not enough to make up for the game's technical flaws. The lack of online multiplayer and the removal of the map editor further limited its appeal, making it an almost forgotten entry in the entire series. Herc Drubman Jr. has become something of a recurring character and a fan favourite in the Far Cry series, popping up in nearly every major installment since his debut. He first appeared in Far Cry 3 and is a wild, fun-loving and often reckless character who's always up for a fight or a bit of chaos. In Far Cry 4, he returns with a series of side missions where his lovable but bumbling nature shines through, as he helps the player with various tasks, all while providing some form of humour. By the time we get to Far Cry 5, Herc's role expands further. Not only is he a guns for hire who can be recruited to assist in taking down the cult in Hope County, but what many people don't realise is that his family also plays an important role in the game's story. Herc even appears in Far Cry New Dawn, the post-apocalyptic sequel to Far Cry 5, where his loyalty and survival skills see him through the collapse of a society. So it's safe to say he's a character we've seen a lot of. But what about his family? Because a lot of people may not know that the Herc bloodline runs deep, and you may not realize. Let's start with Urki. Now Urki is an eccentric character who appears in Far Cry Primal. You see, in Primal, Urki is a prehistoric ancestor of Herc, known for his bizarre inventions and peculiar personality. He often tasks the player with gathering unusual materials for his outlandish projects, which often involved in some pretty amusing outcomes. There's also Herc Drubman Sr., whose character in Far Cry 5 is known for being the father of Herc Drubman Jr. Herc's father is a wealthy conservative and is running for office during the events of the game. He's characterized by his tough, no-nonsense demeanor and a strong sense of American pride. Despite his success, his relationship with his son is strained, as he often disapproves of Herc Jr.'s reckless behavior. There's also Adelaide Drubman, who is also a character in Far Cry 5, known as the tough and independent mother of Herc Drubman Jr. She runs a helicopter rental service in Hope County, Montana, and is often seen piloting her chopper Tulip. You see, unlike Herc Sr., Adelaide has a soft spot for her son, even if she doesn't fully understand or approve of his wild antics. Now here's where the family tree starts to go off the beaten path. Another part of Herc's family is Sharky Beaushaw, who is this lively character that first appears in Far Cry 5, and he also returns in Far Cry New Dawn. Now Sharky is the younger cousin of Herc, and shares the family's love for chaos and explosions. Another character is Gina Guerra, who's introduced in Far Cry New Dawn. Gina is part of the group that's resisting the Highwaymen's control over Hope County. She's also the girlfriend of Herc Drubman Jr. and the mother of their son Blade. Gina is pretty much how you'd say a warrior and is fearless. And last but not least, there's Blade Drubman, the young son of Herc Drubman Jr. and also Gina Guerra. Although he doesn't play an active role in the game's events, Blade represents the next generation of the Drubman family. With parents like Herc and Gina, I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up being as wild and adventurous as them, and may even feature in Far Cry 7. Ubisoft have a tendency of adding references and Easter eggs in their games that tie into their other franchises, and the most common example of this is Assassin's Creed. Far Cry is a franchise that's full of Assassin's Creed references, secrets and Easter eggs. In fact, there are so many that I could genuinely make an entire video based on them that would be well over 30 minutes long. So to avoid this entry in the Iceberg being about 25% of the video, I'll just feature some of my favourite Assassin's Creed references that are within Far Cry. In Far Cry 3, one of the most notable Easter eggs appears in the Lost Expedition levels, where you can discover files and logos tied to Abstergo Industries, the evil corporation from Assassin's Creed. As you explore these levels, you'll uncover references to the Pieces of Eden, powerful artifacts central to the Assassin's Creed lore. There's even a code, 122112, directly referencing the infamous date of December 21st, 2012, a very important moment in Assassin's Creed where the world was supposed to end. Additionally, during the mission Aced in the Hole, Hoyt cuts off Jason's ring finger, a possible nod to the early assassin tradition of removing the ring finger to use the hidden blade. In Far Cry 4, the lost letters scattered throughout the game feature Templar seals, often found near the bodies of dead English soldiers. This is a direct link to the Templars, you know, the main bad guys in the Assassin's Creed series. Far Cry 5 continues a tradition with a mission called A Leap of Faith, where players must take a leap of faith off a cliff, echoing the signature Assassin's Creed Leap of Faith. There are also subtle nods in the form of randomly generated characters named after Evie Fry from Assassin's Creed Syndicate, and a note in the mission Patria Acts referencing Galina Varanina, a modern day assassin in the Assassin's Creed lore. Even the game's Lost on Mars DLC includes a reference to those who came before, the ancient civilization from Assassin's Creed. Far Cry 6 is full of Assassin's Creed Easter eggs. On the starting island, you can find a tower with a wooden plank overlooking a pile of hay, clearly a nod to the Leap of Faith. As you approach the edge, you'll hear the iconic eagle screech, but attempting the jump will result in your death. Elsewhere in the game, you can find a note referencing the golden apple, a clear shout out to the Apple of Eden. There's also a mention of an ancient spear once broken repaired multiple times, referencing the spear of Leonidas from Assassin's Creed Odyssey. Hannelore Schmatz was a German mountaineer who tragically died on Mount Everest in 1979, becoming one of the first women to perish on the mountain. Schmatz and her team had successfully reached the summit, but during her descent, she and another climber, Ray Gennett, succumbed to exhaustion and the harsh conditions. For years, Schmatz's body was visible to climbers taking the southern route to the Everest summit. Her remains were frozen in a sitting position, leaning against her backpack with her eyes open and hair blowing in the wind, located about 100 meters from the path. You may be wondering why on earth I'm talking about such an irrelevant topic in a Far Cry Iceberg. Well, you see, in Far Cry 4, there's a subtle but eerie reference to Hannelore Schmatz. As you're able to explore the mountainous regions of Kyrat, you'll come across the frozen remains of a female climber, which is almost identical to Hannelore Schmatz's position when she was found on Mount Everest. At this location, just west of the Far Cry 4 map, you'll find a house, but behind the house is where the secret is. So you'll find an underground bunker of some sorts. And once you break the wood blocking the path, you'll find a few things here such as weapons, ammo, and most strangely, there is a literal nuclear bomb just chilling on the table. This is pretty strange, as a nuclear bomb should not be in somebody's random backyard. Could this nuclear bomb be considered canon? Because in the Pagan Min DLC for Far Cry 6, Pagan mentions to RJ that Crytek has developed nuclear technology, and reveals that these nukes were aimed at a location in Montana, most likely Hope County. This implies that if you chose the resist ending in Far Cry 5, the nukes that devastated Hope County could perhaps have been launched from Crytek. I'll talk more on this theory later on. Christopher Mintz-Plasse is an American actor best known for his roles in comedy films. He gained fame for portraying characters like McLovin in Superbad and Chris D'Amico in Kick-Ass, and his sequel Kick-Ass 2. In terms of Far Cry, he played a massive role as the main protagonist in the Far Cry Experience. Now, the Far Cry Experience is a 4-part web series released in 2012 as a tie-in to the launch of Far Cry 3. The series is a mix of live action and gameplay footage and serves as a comedic yet dark prequel to the events of the game. In the series, Christopher Mintz-Plasse plays a fictionalized version of himself, who along with a small film crew is stranded on the Rook Islands, aka the setting of Far Cry 3. In this web series, Christopher quickly finds out that the island is way more dangerous than he ever imagined, especially after he runs into the villain we all know being Vaas. Things take a dark turn as Vaas starts tormenting Christopher, leading to some pretty disturbing and violent moments that really capture the intense vibe of the game. Throughout the web series, Christopher goes through a lot of psychological and physical torture, all captured on camera. Christopher endures everything from severe dehydration and being trapped in a glass container with a giant spider, to having a firecracker explode in his face, getting urinated on, shocked with a car battery, and even unknowingly eating bits of his cameraman's flesh, who by the way is the YouTuber John Sandman. That's pretty crazy because I watch John Sandman's Rocket League content a lot, and to find out one of my favorite YouTubers is in this is kind of insane. Anyway, after several days of this horrific torture, Chris finally dies from dehydration. Vaas, oddly enough, seems genuinely affected by Chris's death, taking a moment to mourn him before burying his head in the sand. Then, upon hearing that another victim has arrived on Rook Island, he heads back to regroup with his pirate crew. I'm sure you can figure out who that mysterious arrival is that came to Rook Island. And after this is where the events of Far Cry 3 happens. You know, one thing I've noticed when it comes to Ubisoft is their strange addiction to adding cat islands, or certain areas of land where cats just exist. I can recall Assassin's Creed Mirage having an area that's just full of cats, even Assassin's Creed Unity and Watch Dogs 2. Well, in Far Cry 6, this is also the case. So you can discover a small island off the eastern coast of Valle de Oro's Barrial region. It's located in the far northeastern corner of the map, on the east side of Tormentoso Bay. On the southern tip of a chain of islands, you'll find a tiny island with some cats lounging on a boat. Now, of course, these are not real cats, but rather plastic ones. Also, since this island is quite remote, getting there by boat or plane can be a bit challenging. You'll also find a message that's written out using the rocks which spell out to M-I-A-U, which, if I'm not mistaken, is meow in Spanish. As far as I can tell, the cats don't serve any gameplay purpose. You won't get any gear or items from finding them, and they don't seem to play a role in advancing the story or any side quests. Now, here's an interesting point to know in regards to this cat island. So during Ubisoft's July 2020 presentation, Amanda Munt, a level artist at Ubisoft Toronto who worked on Watch Dogs Legion, talked about creating these huge digital worlds and how artists have the freedom to sneak in little Easter eggs. She specifically mentioned the cat boats in Assassin's Creed Unity and even Watch Dogs 2, and teased that there might be something similar in Watch Dogs Legion. It's pretty unclear whether the cats in Far Cry 6 are Amanda Munt's handiwork or if a colleague took inspiration from her, but given that Ubisoft Toronto worked on both Watch Dogs Legion and Far Cry 6, it could be a nod to the ongoing cat boat Easter egg. In Far Cry 5, the legend of Bigfoot, also known as Sasquatch, has sparked the curiosity of a lot of players, who believe the creature might be hiding somewhere in Hope County, Montana. The idea of Bigfoot being in the game started circulating around after players discovered various clues scattered throughout the game's world, suggesting that the creature could be lurking in dense forests or remote mountains. One of the most important hints comes from a prepper stash mission called Gone Squatching, which leads players to a cabin in the Whitetail Mountains. Here, a note on the door mentions searching for proof of Sasquatch's existence. As you follow the trail, you can encounter signs of a struggle, including pools of blood and a dead body. Things got even more interesting when players started finding what looks like Sasquatch's footprints at places like Lookout Point. These large mysterious tracks fuel speculation that Bigfoot might actually be out there in Far Cry 5. To add to this mystery, some NPCs in the game make cryptic comments about feeling like something's watching them, saying they've got a squatchy feeling.
Feels like something's watching. Kinda getting that squatchy feeling. Whew.
Oh, and the same NPC that says that also at one point will mention that she knew the person that lived in the cabin, and he would talk about Bigfoot quite a lot. Now inside the cabin related to the Prepper Stash mission, you can find a map covered with notes, photos and marks that supposedly track Bigfoot sightings across Hope County. This map is a goldmine for anyone determined to uncover the truth, pointing them towards a spot where Bigfoot might have been seen. But you see, despite all of these hints and the excitement many people have stirred up, nobody has actually found Bigfoot in the game. All of this just adds to the mystery, making Bigfoot one of the most interesting and elusive Easter eggs in Far Cry 5. There's a few outright scary secrets in the Far Cry games, and O'Hara's haunted house is one of the more eerie locations in Far Cry 5, making it a perfect entry to feature in this video. So this comes in the form of a Prepper Stash, and it's located eastward of the Henbane River Rail Bridge and Dead Man's River. Now the note to start the Prepper Stash reads as, "I've been enjoying the show, watching everyone in the country tear each other to pieces. I've left some treats at the top of the barn for anyone brave enough to go through my haunted house." At this point, you must turn on the power to activate the haunted house. Once you do this, you'll notice a mysterious person peering out the window of the haunted house, so naturally you go to explore. The actual event itself of everything happening inside is pretty cool. You've got mannequins everywhere, attempted jump scares happening, flashing lights, a car that's about to hit you, a woman on a bed that tries to jump scare you, a wolf appearing out of nowhere, a crazy woman with a knife, a bear appearing, a creepy butcher, and that's pretty much it. Basically, a lot of things happen. Now when you reach the top of the barn, you'll notice that no one is there, and the man you saw at the start simply just disappeared. There is also a Pennywise reference in this barn attic, and it's just an outright pretty creepy secret that you might overlook in Far Cry 5. Firewatch is a very popular indie game that was released in 2016, and in that game, the two main characters are Henry and Delilah, who both communicate to each other over walkie-talkies. The reference in Far Cry 5 is tucked away in the starter island, and it's a great example of how Far Cry 5 incorporates clever tributes to other games. So on this starter island, you'll probably come across a fire tower. If you listen to the answering machine at the top, you'll hear a panicked message directed at someone named Henry. The message doesn't really provide many details, but given that the main character in Firewatch is also named Henry, and his job involves watching for fires from a similar lookout tower, it's not hard to see that this is a clear reference to that game.
Hey Henry, I'm at the edge of the wood near where you spotted the fire sign. I don't know what that showboater was doing buzzing the treetops, but the sky is now clear of air traffic. That smoke plume is pretty thick.
In Far Cry Primal, Ubisoft pays homage to one of its own games, Far Cry 3 Blood Dragon, with a hidden Easter egg that fans of the series will appreciate, the skeleton of a blood dragon. So the blood dragon skeleton can be found in a cave, located in the northeastern part of the Far Cry Primal map. It's in a location that's not exactly named. At the end of the river, you'll come across a icy waterfall. When you reach it, head left then turn right and follow the path that leads up and behind the waterfall. That's where this cave is located. Once inside, you'll come across a fossilized blood dragon skeleton, along with a cluster of glowing eggs. You know, maybe it's possible this is where Sloan's Omega Force first discovered them, hidden in the remnants of 2007. Earlier in the video, I talked about how you were able to find Boomer the dog in Far Cry 6. Well, on a completely opposite note, you can also find his grave in Far Cry New Dawn. Do remember that New Dawn came out before Far Cry 6, so at that point in time, seeing this grave pretty much solidified that Boomer did in fact die, and he did not make it after the Montana explosion. It does make sense though once you also realize that New Dawn takes place 17 years after the events of Far Cry 5, so there's just no way the dog was alive at this point. But hey, I guess Ubisoft retconned this to please fans that missed Boomer. Anyway, to find Boomer's grave, you'd need to head to the Fang Center, which is in the southwestern part of the map, just north of Prosperity. Oh, and speaking of Prosperity, remember that name, I'll talk about that later. Behind the building, there's a tunnel that leads underground, a dark, slightly creepy passage that holds the answer to what quote-unquote happened to Boomer. At the end of the tunnel, you'll come across a large coffin with a huge piece of concrete covering it. If you throw an explosive near the coffin, the concrete will break apart, revealing the name Boomer etched on the side. It's a bittersweet discovery for those who love Boomer in Far Cry 5, giving you kind of closure, I guess. Well, fake closure that is, because you know, the dog is alive in Far Cry 6 or whatnot. Now what's interesting is the replacement for Boomer in New Dawn is the dog Timber, a canine scout who takes on a similar role to Boomer. King's Hot Spring Hotel is one of the more creepy and mysterious locations in Far Cry 5, situated in the Henbane River region of Hope County, Montana. This hotel was built way back in 1866, and it actually has a pretty dark past. So on May 12, 1902, a landslide tragically destroyed half of the hotel, killing 16 people whose bodies were never recovered. The tragedy fueled local superstitions, and over time, stories began to circulate about the spirits of the victims haunting the hotel. These ghost stories persisted even after the hotel was rebuilt, becoming a part of the hotel's lore. In Far Cry 5, the project at Eden's Gate, aka the cultists, have taken over King's Hot Springs Hotel, turning it into one of their cult outposts. Now strangely, despite the building's new purpose, the hotel's haunted reputation lives on, with even some of the cultists reportedly complaining about eerie sounds and strange occurrences within its walls. Just take a listen for yourself. Once you clear the building and liberate it, this is where you can explore. You may stumble upon notes left by a ghost hunter, further hinting at the paranormal activity believed to occur at the hotel. It's even more scary when you notice strange occurrences happening, such as the eyes of this bear mounted in the hotel following you as you move. Moving on into the Iceberg, we're now at tier 3. At this tier, information will start to become a lot less known compared to tier 1 and tier 2. If you know about some of the entries in this tier, then kudos to you. Let's start with the Jackal is Jack Carver. Now at first, for many years, this was a theory. So released in 2004, Far Cry kicked off with the story of Jack Carver, a former American Special Forces operative who finds himself on a mission to rescue a journalist after being attacked and stranded on a mysterious chain of islands. The game introduced the open world gameplay that would become a signature of the series, but you see, it lacked a memorable villain, instead featuring a somewhat generic quote-unquote mad scientist. You see, when Ubisoft took over the franchise, they released Far Cry 2 in 2008, which took the series to a new direction. The sequel introduced a fresh setting, a new cast of characters, and a main antagonist that really stood out. In fact, the villain in Far Cry 2 is massively underrated, because we often think of Vaas, Pagan Min, and Joseph Seed. Anyway, this time in Far Cry 2, we were up against a Jackal, a notorious and mysterious arms dealer who the protagonist is sent to track down and eliminate. This marked a big change for the series, setting the stage for the iconic villains that would become a part of the Far Cry experience in future games. For a while, the theory that the Jackal became Jack Carver was floating around for years. That was until 2021. So Far Cry 2's creative director Clint Hocking revealed that the Jackal is actually Jack Carver. Although Jack Carver was once a US Army Special Forces operative, Hocking describes him as a shifty smuggler gunrunner kind of crook. Far Cry 2 is set 10 years after the events of the first game, showing how Carver has evolved into a more ruthless contrabandist, who's now deeply involved in Central Africa's civil war. In Hocking's words, he explained, the Jackal is actually supposed to be Jack Carver from the original Far Cry. Now, it's even more evident when you realize that the texture files for the Jackal are all labeled Jack Carver. Files like Jack Carver _shoes and Jack Carver _hair strongly suggest that during some stage of development, Ubisoft referred to the Jackal as Jack Carver. One of the lingering questions in Far Cry 4 revolves around the fate of Badra, a young girl who is central to the game's story, especially concerning the conflict between the two opposing leaders of the Golden Path, Sabal and Amita. We don't really see Badra much in the game or interact with her, but she is clearly an important person, especially with how protective people are towards her. Now, depending on which leader you choose to support, Badra's future takes very different paths, leaving you to wonder about her ultimate fate. If you choose to support Sabal throughout the game, Badra is positioned to become the new Taran Matara, a religious figurehead revered by the people of Kyrat. Sabal believes that Badra's role as the Taran Matara is essential for maintaining the spiritual and cultural fabric of the country. On the other hand, if you side with Amita, the story takes a different turn. Amita, who is more progressive and pragmatic, sees the Taran Matara as an outdated and oppressive tradition. After assuming control, Amita sends Badra away, believing that this is the best way to protect her from being exploited by the old ways. But you see, the strange thing is the game does not tell you where she sent Badra off to, or what even happened to her. Some people have speculated that Amita sold her to prostitution, especially since Amita at one point in the game says, "Do you know how much people would pay to sleep with a Taran Matara?" Another theory was that Amita had her killed, because she feared that somebody like Sabal could use Badra to rally the people into another revolution against her. So essentially, Amita does seem like she'd be a tyrant, even if you take out Pagan Min. Well, according to the official Far Cry wiki page, it stated that if the player decides to put Amita in charge of the Golden Path, a cutscene in a village named Tirta after the game's ending shows Amita ordering the Golden Path to take children from their parents to work in the opium fields, as she needs more soldiers. When RJ questions what Badra would think of this, Amita responds that she had Badra sent away and that she won't be returning. After this exchange, we're unable to find Badra throughout the game, leaving her fate unknown. As I said, it's unclear whether she is alive or dead, and the dialogue subtly suggests that Amita may have had her killed, but regardless of what we all think, there is unfortunately no clear answer. In the second tier of this Far Cry Iceberg, I talked about Christopher Mintz-Plasse, the protagonist of the Far Cry Experience web series. Well, in that entry, I mentioned how he was tortured quite a lot by vaas, and eventually succumbed to his wounds and died. And after that, the events of Far Cry 3 takes place. While funnily enough, in the actual game of Far Cry 3, you can actually find where his head was buried in the sand as an Easter egg. So the southeastern side of the island is where you need to go to see it. Now for those that have not seen the Far Cry Experience, this would just be a random find and you wouldn't really think much of it. What's interesting about this Easter egg is that you will also receive a trophy or an achievement named Say Hi to the Internet, which is a reference to what vaas says in the Far Cry Experience.
Chris, say hello to the internet peoples.
Fuck! You psycho!
This is not the only head in sand Easter egg in the Far Cry series, as it's also shown again way later in Far Cry 6. So this Easter egg is located on a beach between Corsario's Cache and Burrows Bay in the Cape Santa Maria region. You have to look for elevated sand in the area and shoot the bucket to uncover the head beneath. This is of course the reference to where vaas in the Far Cry Experience puts the bucket over Christopher's head. In Far Cry 3, the developers added a secret and hidden message on a lot of their vehicles in the game. For example, on jet skis, you'll find a caution message and it reads as, "Playing too much video games may lead to aggressive behavior. Handle with care, herp derp." Of course, the herp derp part being a reference to an internet expression and character from Rage comics. People use it or its accompanying rage face to point out its stupid or ignorant remark or behavior. Now, considering Far Cry 3 was released during a period in time where there were plenty of articles out there talking about how video games can lead to violence, this is an amusing addition, as it pretty much makes fun of said articles. You can also find a hidden message on the medicine database entry in Far Cry 3, where it says, "Keep needles sterilized, GLHB." For those that are not aware as to what GLHB means, this is a reference to the website Giant Bomb, where GLHB means good luck, have Batman. It's pretty cool that this was added into Far Cry back then. Remove Motherland Bundle refers to the Far Cry 6 bundle named Motherland Bundle. This bundle's description reads as, "Embody Yara's historic relationship with the fallen Soviet Republic with this glorious new outfit, vehicle, firearm and more." The bundle came with a Soviet gear set featuring a Soviet cap, coat, trousers, boots and watch. However, the bundle was suddenly removed by Ubisoft unexpectedly without a reason. Now the obvious reason that people have come up with is due to the Russian invasion of Ukraine at that time. Ubisoft took down the bundle for obvious reasons. Oh, and you can get this bundle back using mods, so there's that I guess. But it's still pretty interesting to feature in this video nonetheless, as it is pretty secretive. Ringing rocks, also called sonorous or lithophonic rocks, are unique stones that produce a bell-like sound when struck. Although many early scientists were intrigued by these ringing rocks, none were able to develop a credible theory explaining how these rocks produced their distinct sound, or how the boulder fields they found in were formed. Well, the good thing about Far Cry 5 is the game also has this little Easter egg referencing the ringing rocks. So right off the Moccasin River and left off the Fang Center, this is where you can stumble upon the ringing rocks. You'll also find a sign that reads, "Ringing rocks, formed by the erosive action of water over centuries. These boulders emit a bell-like sound when struck lightly with a hammer. Enjoy and leave it pristine for the next visitors. Thank you for visiting Whitetail State Park." Now the great thing about this Easter egg is you do not need a hammer to ring the rocks, but instead you can simply walk over them and they will start to trigger the bell sound. In Far Cry 6, at the Santo Amaro Cemetery, on the southeastern portion of the map, you can stumble upon and discover a literal ghost. Upon arriving, you can find a note that reads, "Is the Santo Amaro Cemetery haunted? People are afraid to visit the Santa Amaro Cemetery at nighttime, for fear of running into what locals are calling the ghost of the broken father." After you read the note and turn around, you'll spot the actual ghost itself pointing in a direction for you to follow. When you go to where the ghost pointed, he'll be there crying and suddenly disappear. You can read a note here that's from the father ghost where he mentions the struggle between his deep grief over the loss of his son and his desire for peace, contrasting with his wife's pursuit of vengeance. The note also mentions the location where the father has decided to live. Now at this point, most people would not think too much of this and move on, but if you actually follow the directions of the note and go to the location, you can find a ritualistic or occult symbol drawn on the ground, surrounded by candles. The design, often associated with mystical or supernatural practices, suggests that this is a place where some form of dark ritual has been performed. Nearby, you'll find a note near a well of some sorts, where the father ghost talks about how he did something bad to his wife because he cannot see her happy with somebody else. If you put 2 and 2 together, it appears that he took the life of his wife and ended his own life at this location. It's some pretty dark stuff, and also a pretty interesting secret to find. What if I told you there's a town in Far Cry 5 that's populated by many people, but at the same time it's populated by nobody? The name of this town is Prosperity, and it's a deserted and haunting town located in the southern corner of the Henbane River region in Far Cry 5. Once a thriving settlement, it was originally backed by the wealthiest rail baron Emmett Reeves. However, the town's fortunes changed dramatically after the death of Reeves' rival Orville Fall. In a move that was fueled by lingering resentment, Reeves abandoned Prosperity and took over the town of Fall, which he spitefully renamed Fall's End. This decision left Prosperity to wither into a ghost town, forgotten by time. In Far Cry 5, Prosperity stands as a collection of decrepit buildings that hint at its once promising past. The town consists of a few structures, featuring a mayor's office, a general store, a bank, and a handful of other crumbling remnants. After the town was abandoned, it caught the attention of a man named Tweak, a drug chemist known for his experimental concoctions. Tweak transformed the town into his own playground by setting up obstacle courses, and he also indulged in his artistic tendencies by carefully arranging a number of mannequins throughout the town. These mannequins are kinda creepy as they are posed in lifelike positions, making Prosperity feel like a place frozen in time, haunted by the ghosts of its past and the twisted mind of its new inhabitant. When Far Cry 3 was released, there was a pretty small but interesting community of Mythbusters. One YouTuber that I enjoyed watching back then was a man named Aaron Prod. Anyway, in Far Cry 3, there was talk of a UFO being in the game. In fact, this UFO myth was the first official myth that people talked about. Players began noticing odd occurrences in the night sky, such as strange lights, moving stars, and other unusual phenomena. This led to nighttime investigations, with some players capturing compelling footage that can be found on YouTube. Additionally, there's a side quest involving a man who talks about aliens abducting his daughter, though nothing unusual can be seen during that quest. In Far Cry 3, there's a hidden side quest named Pin to Earth. In this side quest, you'll come across an old lady standing alone inside a small hut near a village. When you approach her, she gets emotional and tells you that she saw an aeroplane crash outside through her windows, even though her hut does not have any windows. You can accept a quest from her to locate this plane. However, when you find the plane, you'll also find a man standing inside and he's about to cook food. You tell him about the plane crashing, but he tells you that it crashed 10 years ago into a hut. Does that sound familiar? Also, when you ask the man about the old lady, he reveals that there is no such person. Now, strangely, if you return to where you first met this old lady and where you first started the side quest, both the lady and the hut itself would have vanished into thin air. This of course indicates that the plane that crashed into the hut belonged to a woman and she died. The old lady is most definitely a ghost. In Far Cry 3, there's a location that you can clear out that's full of soldiers. Upon revisiting the place after you've killed all the enemies, you can hear screams of the soldiers of all the people you've killed. Now, back when Far Cry 3 was released, a lot of people said that this was an actual in-game thing, where the people that were screaming were people that was killed by vaas. But the actual truth about this strange and creepy encounter is pretty disappointing. Well, it turns out that instead of ghosts and dead soldiers, it's just a glitch. You see, the glitch is that the screams that you can hear are just misplaced sounds that were meant to be from soldiers that would respawn. For a while, people thought that this was a creepy encounter, and they even gave it the name Hell Screams. Far Cry Zeta or Zeta was a cancelled post-apocalyptic Far Cry game that Ubisoft was developing around 2016 to 2017. Not much information has surfaced about the game, with most details coming from leaks on ArtStation. Based on the name, it's possible that Far Cry Zeta or Zeta was an early concept for what eventually became Far Cry 5. Similar to how Far Cry Chronicles was later rebranded as Far Cry 4. The ideas behind Zeta or Zeta likely influenced the ending of Far Cry 5 and contributed to the development of Far Cry New Dawn. There are no videos or information about this project, but there are a lot of images of concept art. In both Far Cry 3 and 6, jellyfish are in these games, floating in coastal waters, often in groups of 2 or 3. While they might seem like harmless background details, these jellyfish can actually sting the player if they swim too close, causing minor damage unless the game is set to a higher difficulty level. But that's not the point of this entry in the Iceberg. Also, ignore the fact that the video you're watching right now is in Russian. I cannot be bothered to do what I'm about to say for myself, so I just found a YouTube video showing it. One of the most obscure and fascinating aspects of jellyfish in Far Cry 3 is tied to a glitch that players can exploit to unlock unlock a hidden handbook entry. You see, normally, jellyfish cannot be killed in the game, but at specific coordinates where the sea vanishes, revealing a dry pit, players can use an explosive or a Molotov to kill a jellyfish. Doing so triggers the handbook entry, a rare achievement due to the difficulty of replicating this glitch. However, you do have to be careful when approaching the pit, as falling into it can cause fatal fall damage due to the lack of water gravity. Now, interestingly, even after killing the jellyfish, the stingers remain active, meaning Jason can still take damage if he gets too close. In Tier 1 of the Iceberg, I talked about how almost every Far Cry game has a secret ending that you can do within the first few minutes or first hour of the story. Well, in Far Cry 4, there's an even more secret of a secret ending that's even more secret than the secret ending that you can easily overlook if you ignore it. So at the end of the story, when you're with Pagan Min spreading the ashes, he flies off into the distance after giving you Kirat. Now at this point, everybody would just assume that's it, and the story ends right there. Well, if you pull out your RPG or explosive and shoot the helicopter down as it's flying away, it will unlock a different kind of ending where Pagan Min is now dead. What's pretty interesting is that this action creates a new unmarked location for you to explore. If you return to Pagan's palace, you'll discover the crash site of the helicopter nearby, with Pagan's body lying on the ground. You can then loot his corpse to obtain his golden pen and his lapel pin, and also 250,000 rupees. If you sell all of those items, you'll make like almost $1 million off that alone. So yeah, I guess you can class this as another ending in a game that has a secret ending. In Far Cry 3, Dr. Earnhardt is a character who resides on Rook Island, producing drugs for the local pirates while also serving as an ally to Jason Brody and offering refuge to Jason's kidnapped friends. However, his story takes a dark turn during the mission The Doctor Is Out, where Jason returns to find Earnhardt's mansion has been attacked. Jason discovers that the Doctor is mortally wounded, and in his final moments, Earnhardt reveals that Jason's friends have been taken to Citrus Temple by jungle warriors. He then dies immediately after delivering this message. His death is pretty brutal, as it's implied that he was killed by the Rakyat, the native warriors of the island. What makes his death even more unsettling is the aftermath that follows. After his death, Earnhardt's once grand home falls into a state of extreme decay. Blood stains appear on the floor, and parts of the house seem to crumble in disrepair. This sudden and grim transformation leads many people to believe that Dr. Earnhardt's spirit might still linger on in Rook Island. One of the most compelling pieces of evidence supporting the idea that Dr. Earnhardt has become a ghost is found outside his mansion. There, in a small rotunda, where it's suggested the Doctor was killed, if you take out your camera, you may notice strange white spheres appearing within the rotunda. These orbs have been widely speculated to be the manifestation of ghosts, possibly Earnhardt's spirit or others who have met a similar fate. Inside the mansion, more paranormal activity can be observed. Props and objects within the house mysteriously fall over, as if pushed by an unseen force when the player walks through certain areas. This poltergeist-like activity is pretty creepy, suggesting that the Doctor's ghost may be responsible. In Far Cry 6, Ubisoft continues its tradition of adding Easter eggs and references that pay homage to earlier entries in the series. One of the more interesting callbacks is the appearance of the Bliss Flower, a potent and hallucinogenic plant first introduced in Far Cry 5. This reference ties the world of Yara back to the unsettling events of Hope County, Montana, where the Bliss was used by Joseph Seed and his cult Eden Gates to manipulate and brainwash people. The Bliss Easter egg can be found during the side mission The Seeds of Love. In this side quest, you'll assist Lorenzo Cancesco in reuniting with his 7 children scattered across Sierra Perdida. While searching for his 4th child at the Oseguera farm, you can stumble upon a familiar sight, a pot containing a white flower, marked with the symbol of Joseph Seed's Eden's Gate. The note will mention that it's from the Seed family, and the word faith is capitalized. Upon interacting with the flower, you get hit with a wave of nostalgia, as you'll experience hallucinations similar to those caused by the Bliss in Far Cry 5. The green mist and the appearance of a ghostly woman dancing to the jungle evoke memories of the drug-induced visions that played a massive role in Far Cry 5. Now, you see, if you follow the woman, it's going to eventually lead you to Lorenzo's daughter, completing this bizarre side quest. And now we move into Tier 4. Tier 4 is what you consider the Abyss. The information in this tier is information you would not expect most people to know. And if you do know, then great, I think. Anyway, let's get into it. This first entry is Longinus is Prosper Kawasi. So in Far Cry 4, we meet Longinus, and he's a character that gives us weapons throughout the game. In Far Cry 2, Prosper Kawasi is the captain of the APR, and a former street gang leader in the Northern Territory. One of the most popular theories in the Far Cry community is the idea that Longinus from Far Cry 4 is actually an older version of Prosper Kawasi in Far Cry 2. This theory is fueled by several striking similarities between the two characters, leading many people to believe that they could be the same person, or at the very least, that Longinus was inspired by Kawasi. Both Longinus and Prosper Kawasi share a strong physical resemblance, featuring similar facial features and a distinctive presence. To be fair, they both do have a deep connection to firearms and a history of trafficking blood diamonds during a civil war in an unnamed African country. This shared background information forms a big link in the theory, as it fits perfectly with the events and setting of Far Cry 2, where warlords like Kawasi were heavily involved in the illegal diamond trade. Another key piece of evidence supporting this theory is the connection to Gokha Falls. In Far Cry 2, there is a mission where the player must travel to Gokha Falls to assassinate a warlord who could be Prosper Kawasi, depending on if your faction is the UFLL. Interestingly, in Far Cry 4, Longinus admits that he was baptized by the waters of Gokha Falls after a near-death experience, which led to his religious conversion. This detail ties Longinus' backstory directly to a location of importance in Far Cry 2, further suggesting that Longinus and Kawasi may indeed be the same person. Both characters undergo significant transformation, which is key to the theory. Prosper Kawasi, known for his brutal actions during the Civil War, could have taken on the identity of Longinus after finding religion and seeking redemption for his past sins. Longinus' obsession with guns, combined with his religious zeal, could be seen as Kawasi's way of reconciling his violent past with his newfound fate. The name Longinus itself is a reference to the legendary Roman soldier who, after committing a morally questionable act, found salvation through religion, mirroring Kawasi's potential journey. Now, while the theory is not confirmed by Ubisoft, there are subtle nods within Far Cry 4 that seem to support this idea. For example, a loot item called Bible is described as being well read, with gun references circled, likely belonging to Longinus. This Bible, combined with Longinus' history and his mysterious past, adds a lot to his character that align with the idea of him being a reformed warlord. This one is pretty funny, and I featured it in this video because I find petitions that attempt to cancel video games for silly reasons just straight up unemployment behavior. Anyway, when Ubisoft revealed that Far Cry 5 would be set in Montana, featuring a religious extremist cult as the main antagonist, a vocal segment of the fanbase reacted kind of strange, arguing that the game was an attack on American values and culture. The petition, which circulated online, demanded that either Ubisoft cancel the game or make big changes to its content to avoid offending American gamers. I'm pretty sure nobody really got offended, but regardless, the angry petitioners expressed a lot of frustration with what they perceived as Ubisoft's anti-Americanism and political correctness. They suggested several alterations to the game, featuring changing the actual villain to a more realistic threat like an Islamic extremist or inner-city gangs, diversifying the cast of villains to avoid exclusively targeting white Americans, and even relocating the game's setting to Canada for the American market. Strangely, the petition got thousands of signatures, which I find to be strange. It just makes you wonder how many unusual people are out there on the internet. The Beta Restoration Project is a fan-driven mod for Far Cry that aims to bring back the early beta content that was altered or removed from the final game. Created by passionate modders, the project seeks to recreate elements from the original version of Far Cry, including characters like the infamous Trigens, as well as missions, textures, and environments that were part of Crytek's initial vision but did not make it into the final release. It was started in 2017 by modders Changer of the Ways and MVXLNM. The project focused on researching and rebuilding these early game elements. Over time, the project did grow, which was pretty good, with new team members contributing to their skills in coding, content creation, and historical research on Far Cry's development. Despite facing a lot of challenges, including personal issues among team members and changes in leadership, the project did continue to progress. Key milestones featuring gaining access to the E3 2002 demo, which provided a wealth of new material for the project, and the addition of new contributors who helped drive the project forward. The mod also aims to restore original missions and settings, such as the Carrier Fort mission and the Swamp level, allowing you to experience Far Cry as it was initially envisioned by the developers. In addition to visual and gameplay elements, the Beta Restoration Project team has worked to recreate the early HUD styles and beta versions of weapons and vehicles, further making that nostalgic experience feel much more apparent for players. But not everything was positive, because in 2021, the project experienced a split due to personal conflicts within the team, losing to the creation of a separate mod called Beta Aesthetics. Despite these challenges, the remaining Beta Restoration Project team members, featuring new contributors Far Out, DXMZA, and 6607, continue to work on the original Beta Restoration Project with renewed focus and direction. One of the most debated aspects of Far Cry 5 is its controversial ending, particularly the quote-unquote good ending, where many players initially felt the ending was abrupt and lacked coherence. However, upon closer inspection, it becomes clear that the game was always laying the groundwork for this outcome from the very beginning, and Joseph Seed's prophecy was in fact always right. Throughout the game, Far Cry 5 is heavily influenced by a biblical symbolism, especially from the Book of Revelations. Joseph Seed frequently references these prophecies. According to the Book of Revelations, the breaking of the 7 seals heralds the apocalypse and the second coming of Christ. Joseph believes that he is chosen by God to shepherd his followers through the end times, and his every action is aimed at preparing for this inevitable event. One of the most outright in-your-face moments occurs right before you have the option to arrest Joseph. He declares the breaking of the first seal, quoting, "And behold, it was a white horse, and hell followed with him." This is not a coincidence, because the sheriff who's with you's name is White Horse, symbolizing the white horse of the apocalypse, and you as the deputy represent the hell that follows, inadvertently setting off the chain of events leading to the end of the world. As the game progresses, you as a player continue to metaphorically break through the seals through your actions, whether you realize it or not. Each confrontation with Joseph's lieutenants, John, Faith, and Jacob, brings the world closer to the final seal being broken. By the time you reach the final confrontation with Joseph, the stage is set for the prophecy's fulfillment. You see, if you choose to resist Joseph, you unwittingly break the last seal, triggering the apocalypse. The world plunges into nuclear war, proving that Joseph's warnings were not the ravings of a madman, but a chilling prediction of the future. The game's story suggests that your actions, despite, if you have any good intentions, directly lead to the very outcome you're trying to prevent. It's interesting because Ubisoft weaves this prophecy into the fabric of the game in very subtle ways. The song Only You, which is used for brainwashing by Jacob, hints at your unique role is bringing about the end. There's also Fate's Seed, where she also foreshadows this, when she tells you that you hold the power to decide everyone's fate. By your third time you're kidnapped, Joseph preaches in a bombed out version of his church, a direct allusion to the destruction that's about to unfold. According to game director Alice Hutchinson, in Far Cry 4, the original plan for the main story included an option where at a certain point, you could decide that the rebels were just as bad as Pagan Min, allowing you to start taking over outposts and handing them over to him instead. Now the reason that this was not featured in the final version of Far Cry 4 is because, well, the development of the game simply ran out of time, and they were not able to implement this feature. One of the lesser known entries in the Far Cry series is the Far Cry 2 mobile game, developed by Gameloft. Released in 2008, this mobile adaptation was designed for early feature phones, offering a pretty big experience from its console and PC counterpart. Unlike the open world exploration that defined Far Cry 2 on larger platforms, the mobile version was a more linear mission-based game. It featured a kind of top-down view, 2D graphics, and simplified gameplay mechanics suited for the limited capabilities of mobile devices at that time. You pretty much took on the role of a mercenary navigating the treacherous landscapes of Africa, battling enemies, and completing objectives similar in theme to the original game. While the core storyline loosely mirrored the story of Far Cry 2, focusing on the pursuit of the Jackal, the gameplay was drastically scaled down. The game offered a series of missions involving combat, stealth, and survival elements, though in a much more simplified format. Today, the Far Cry 2 mobile game by Gameloft is largely forgotten, overshadowed by the more obvious entries in the franchise. However, it remains a curious piece of Far Cry history, representing an early attempt to expand the series beyond traditional gaming platforms. This theory right here is the second most popular theory after the whole Jackal is Jack Carver one, and this one focuses on if RJ Garley, the protagonist of Far Cry 4, was in fact the person responsible for nuking Montana at the end of Far Cry 5. This theory emerged after the release of the Far Cry 6 DLC titled Control, where it was revealed that Pagan Min, the villain of Far Cry 4, had stockpiled nuclear weapons in Kyrat, aimed at the United States. You see, in the Control DLC, we were able to explore Pagan Min's mind and uncover a secret tape left for RJ. In this recording, Pagan reveals that he has nuclear weapons stored in Kyrat, where he aimed at the United States as a precaution against potential interference from the CIA. Pagan Min mentions that his nukes were pointed at a region in Montana, the same area where the events of Far Cry 5 unfold. The theory that RJ could have launched his nukes is based on several factors. If we as a player decide to choose the genocide route in Far Cry 4, where RJ eliminates both Sabal and Amita, RJ becomes the sole ruler of Kyrat. This also goes back to the previous entry I talked about in this Iceberg, being the "you can kill Sabal and Amita" entry. Some people have speculated that RJ, who's now in control of the country's military resources, might have decided to use the nukes as a deterrent against further foreign intervention, possibly targeting the United States as a show of force. But you see, this theory is controversial because RJ does not seem to harbor any animosity towards the United States, making it unclear why he would launch such a devastating attack. There is also the idea that Far Cry 4 offers alternate endings, where Sabal, Amita, and even Pagan Min can survive, complicating the idea that RJ is solely responsible for the nuclear strike. There are alternative theories that people have suggested. For example, somebody on Reddit mentioned if Sabal and Amita were left in power, they might have been the ones to launch the nukes, especially given their power-hungry natures. Sabal's strict traditionalism and Amita's ruthless pragmatism could have led either to take drastic measures to protect Kyrat from foreign influence. Pagan Min himself is another candidate, as he he's the one who originally acquired the nukes. However, his message to RJ suggests that while he was prepared for the worst, he did not necessarily intend to use them, leaving the true perpetrator of the nuclear strike just left in mystery. In Far Cry 5, there is a rare and unsettling radio message that you can sometimes hear while inside a car, a truck or a plane. The message is quite eerie and hard to decipher, but it's believed by many people that the person behind the static radio message is asking for help. While you can hear this message in various parts of the map, most people have reported that it's easiest to find by driving around in the northernmost part of the game, specifically in Jacob's region. There's a lot of speculation that this mysterious broadcast might be connected to the victims of Jacob's brainwashing, or could hint at the impending nuclear conflict in the United States during the events of the game. However, the true meaning remains unknown, as Ubisoft has not provided any official explanation or comment on this haunting mystery. As of me making this video, it's unclear whether Far Cry 7 is real or not, but it in fact is. Far Cry 7 will be the next Far Cry game, which sounds pretty obvious. However, we do have some leaks and rumors that came out related to the next Far Cry game. So the plot of Far Cry 7 is said to revolve around a wealthy family being kidnapped, with players taking on the role of a family member tasked with rescuing the others. This story choice suggests that players' decisions will directly impact the story, as family members might die if not saved in time, leading to multiple possible outcomes. The shift to a non-linear narrative in Far Cry 7 is a departure from the more traditional linear storytelling seen in previous games. Another rumored feature in Far Cry 7 is a time limit that pressures players to act quickly in rescuing family members. This mechanic could raise the stakes quite a lot, making each decision feel more impactful. However, it also adds to the challenge of balancing a non-linear story with the need for a satisfying ending. There is no exact confirmed or speculated release date for Far Cry 7, but it's definitely coming, and so am I. In the early stages of Far Cry 3's development, the villain wasn't the iconic Vaas that we all know today, but rather a different character known as Bull. This early concept envisioned Bull as a physically imposing villain, designed to intimidate through sheer size and brutality, rather than the psychological depth that Vaas will later bring to the table. Bull was portrayed as a massive brutish figure, a towering 300-pound man covered in scars, with a broad jaw, nose ring and elaborate tribal tattoos. He was meant to embody raw physical threat, a stereotype seen in many action games at that time. The direction changed a lot when actor Michael Mando auditioned for the role. Mando's performance brought a whole new energy and a completely different physicality to the character. His portrayal was subtle yet haunting, and it quickly became clear that Bull's intimidating size wasn't necessary to create a memorable villain. The development team realized that the true terror could lie in a character's personality and unpredictability rather than just their physical presence. So as a result, Bull was scrapped, and the character was redesigned to fit Mando's strengths. The new character, eventually named Vaas Montenegro, retained some of the original concept's intensity, but expressed it to his volatile, unstable personality rather than brute force. The design shifted away from exaggerated physical traits like heavy scars and burns to more nuanced details. Vaas's mannerisms, his eerie calm between violent outbursts, and his ability to be at the same time charming and terrifying. Thank God they did this, because Vaas, in my opinion, is probably one of, if not the best villain in gaming history. Or at least he's up there for sure. This Bull character may not even be in the top 50. One of the most surprising and politically charged Easter eggs in Far Cry 5 is a mission titled Patriot Acts, which references the infamous and unconfirmed Donald Trump P-tape. If you don't know what I'm referring to, the Trump P-tape is an alleged video which reportedly shows Donald Trump watching two prostitutes urinate on a bed in a Moscow hotel room in 2013. The tape is rumored to have been secretly filmed by Russian intelligence and has been suggested as a potential tool for blackmail. In Far Cry 5, the mission Patriot Acts tasks you with stealing a tape from one of the game's hinting at scandalous content that could embarrass the character if revealed. While the character in the game is not explicitly named as Donald Trump, the game drops several hints that make the connection clear, such as referring to the setting as Kremlandia and describing the tape as being recorded in a luxury suite. Although the tape's existence has never been confirmed, its inclusion in Far Cry 5 sparked attention and controversy, particularly among Trump supporters. Throughout the years, Ubisoft has experimented with numerous ideas and projects related to the Far Cry series. Some of these projects may have been early versions of existing games, while others could be entirely original concepts that were ultimately abandoned. I'll refer to this entry in the Iceberg as Project X. So Project X symbolizes all those untold stories, the creative endeavors that for various reasons never made it into the public eye. According to leaks and reports from industry insiders, Project Blackbird and Project Maverick represent two distinct directions that Ubisoft consider the future of the Far Cry series. Project Blackbird is rumored to be the next mainline game, potentially Far Cry 7, which could feature a non-linear narrative which I talked about earlier during the Far Cry 7 entry. On the other hand, Project Maverick is described as an extraction-based shooter set in the Alaskan wilderness, with a heavy focus on survival mechanics and permadeath. This project seems to cater more towards the multiplayer and hardcore survival gaming audience, potentially branching out from the traditional Far Cry formula to offer something entirely different. The existence of these projects, especially under such secretive codenames, fuels fan speculation about the direction Ubisoft might take the franchise. The Deep Jungle is a pretty interesting piece of content from Far Cry 3 that remains a mystery. This area was intended to be a more immersive and dense version of the jungle environment, featuring thicker foliage, more cover, increased shade, and possibly even a higher concentration of wildlife compared to the jungles in the final game. The concept of the Deep Jungle was likely to offer players a more challenging and atmospheric experience, where moving around the environment would require more stealth and strategy. However, despite the potential this area had, it was ultimately cut from the final release. The most widely accepted theory for this removal is tied to the hardware limitations of consoles at that time. The dense environment of the Deep Jungle would have likely demanded more processing power, making it pretty difficult to maintain a stable frame rate, particularly as players approached or entered the area. This technical constraint meant that the ambitious design of the Deep Jungle had to be scaled back or removed entirely to ensure the game could run smoothly across all platforms. Thinking of it now, the Deep Jungle may have already been showcased a little in early presentations or pre-alpha footage of Far Cry 3, suggesting that it was once a significant part of the game's world. The entry /map demo refers to a little known hidden tech demo level embedded within the original Far Cry game. Accessible only to the game's console commands, this level is not part of the standard gameplay and serves more as a developer showcase or experimental area rather than a fully fledged version. To access this demo, players must open the console within the game and type /map demo. Upon loading, they are transported to a small unfinished map that contains a handful of mercenaries, basic terrain features, and a few oddities that hint at the early development stages of the game. Notably, this map includes unique elements such as ramps with barrels and a minimalistic environment that lacks the polish of the main game levels. It simply provides a rare glimpse into the developmental process, showing off terrain that was likely used for testing various game mechanics and visual effects. Mutant refers to the name of a cut level from Far Cry 1 that never made it into the final release. This mission was set on the same volcano islands as the level Dam and Volcano, and the level was designed to occur after the events of the factory level. This cut level would have placed the protagonist Jack Carver in a dire situation, waking up in the wreckage of a V-22 Osprey after being captured by mercenaries. It would have been a totally unique kind of mission, where Jack would have to navigate through a battlefield teeming with Trigens, which are genetically modified monsters, and also mercenaries locked in deadly combat. The level's design involved Jack making his way to a cave system overrun by these creatures, discovering the wreck of a UH-60 helicopter, and eventually using a hang glider to reach a mercenary training facility near the Volcano lab. One of the most interesting aspects of this cut content is that some of the dialogue intended for this cut mutant level was repurposed and used in the Dam level of the final game, giving us a small taste of what this last mission might have been like. Ultimately, the decision to cut the mutant level was likely due to time constraints or hardware limitations. And last but not least, Cillian Murphy. Yes, you heard that right. You may be wondering what he's doing in this Far Cry Iceberg. Well, according to a well-known and mostly accurate leaker named Jonathan, I've talked about him a lot in my Assassin's Creed videos, and he's always spot on. He very vaguely mentioned that Cillian Murphy could be following in the footsteps of Michael Mando and Giancarlo Esposito by portraying the main villain of Far Cry 7. In September 2023, rumors began circulating that Far Cry 7, under the codename Project Blackbird, which I talked about earlier, would feature a non-linear storyline centered on the kidnapping of the protagonist family, with the plot unfolding over a 72-hour in-game period, equivalent to 24 real-time hours. As a result, the number 7 and the 72-hour countdown sparked speculation among people that Jonathan's comments were related to the next installment of the Far Cry series. However, Jonathan came out after people speculated and updated everybody by clarifying that the image of Cillian Murphy in its very cryptic teaser does not imply that he will be in the game. He said, "Attention, I never said Cillian Murphy was going to be in the game. The image means something else." So what could this image of Cillian Murphy mean, and how would he play a role in any Far Cry game? So that brings us to the end of the Far Cry Iceberg Explained. If you did enjoy this video, be sure to also check out my Assassin's Creed and Watch Dogs Iceberg videos too, as those are pretty cool. Anyway, like I said, if you did enjoy this video, be sure to hit that subscribe button. And with that said, I'll see you in the next one.